Somehow Palpatine returned.
Welcome back. Today we're going to be breaking down the Rise of Skywalker novelization. And if you're like, I don't really like the movie, hang around. I think the novelization will make it a little bit better for you. Disclaimer, this will be spoilery if you want to call it that. The movie's been out for 4 years. The book's almost been out for 4 years. So we're just going to talk about it. If you haven't seen it yet, maybe don't watch this video. Or if you don't want to know what happens in the book that's different, maybe hold on till you've read it. Otherwise, let's just have an open discussion about this novel. First of all, it was written by Ray Carson and released in March of 2020. The book is around 352 pages if you are going paperback, or if you are like me and prefer to do the audiobook. That's going to be a 9-hour and 36-minute listen time if you don't speed it up. So the way I'm going to break this down really is not going to be like, oh, this happened, because the movie's out there. Everyone kind of knows the story. So I am going to break down some of the differences, what I think makes this novel even better than the film, or in my case, actually makes the film somewhat good in general, because I don't think it's a great movie, but after reading this, there's some information I have that does make it better and more enjoyable. First of all, as is true with pretty much any book you read versus the film, you're just gonna get a lot more inside the characters' heads, because the books get that liberty. You can't really explain the thought process of characters on screen as easily as you can in a book. So that is going to be the same for Harry Potter, The Hunger Games, other Star Wars literature, Lord of the Rings, whatever it is you're reading, you're going to get more from the characters in the books than you are on screen. That is no different here. One big thing that I was pretty surprised with is there were not really any pacing issues in this novel. If you watch the movie, you kind of need an inhaler because it does not stop. It's just one thing after the other. Very choppy. It makes your viewing experience maybe suboptimal, but in the book, it slows down. It has some time to breathe. You're actually able, like I said, to get into the characters' heads. There's extra scenes in it that break things up, that prolong some scenes, or maybe speed other scenes up to get us to another point. So the way this is written, it just flows so much better than the 2.5 hours we got on screen in the movie. I think that can be common to books as well, because a lot of time books and novels, they are given a little bit more breathing room versus a time constraint that you're going to get on a movie. So again, that's not just specific to this book in particular, that's kind of across the board. Now that's the general stuff. Time to get a little bit more specific. So again, one last warning on spoilers, we're about to dive in. For starters, the order of the film is a little bit different to start the movie off. Instead of starting on Mustafar with Kylo Ren, we actually start with Rey training with Leia. After that, it moves to Mustafar, and the Mustafar scene is actually a little bit longer. You get more description on how that actually came to be Mustafar, because it doesn't really look like it the last time we saw it in Rogue One or in Episode 3 or in Kenobi. We see the Eye of Webbish Bog, which you see in the comics. You can see it in the concept art for the Rise of Skywalker. Kylo Ren speaks to this spider being. It's pretty interesting looking, and then he gets the Wayfinder. General Hux is there, so you get just a little bit more in that scene versus Kylo Ren really quickly brushing through all those soldiers or warriors and then grabbing it. That is not how it goes in the book, and I actually do like a little bit more being explained here. Another big thing that I like, and we pick up on this early, is that Force Ghost Luke is speaking to Leia all throughout the movie, and he has the same message from start to finish. He just keeps telling her, it's time, it's time, it's time. So he's telling Leia it is time for her to let go. It's time for her to become one with the Force. She's going to use all that she has left to connect with Kylo Ren, with Ben Solo. We see that on screen. That's not new to us, but it just kind of plays up to that moment a little bit more and makes that moment a little bit sweeter for us watching it or reading or listening. And these conversations aren't just it's time and Luke's gone. Like usually there's a little bit here and there. We get some of the back and forth from Luke and Leia. So it's good to see that. And I do think on screen, it wouldn't have been hard to do. Just have Luke speaking to her. You don't have to show him, just his voice, her talking back. Now, I know Carrie Fisher had passed at this point, so you can't really add all that in if she hadn't said those lines. But with the way we can deep fake and things like that, I don't think it would have been hard for them to make that happen. As far as the Palpatine information, and Palpatine really is kind of a make or break thing in the film. The somehow Palpatine return line, that's like the worst part of Star Wars for me personally, because it's kind of lazy the way they went about it on screen. But in the novel, they don't have to be lazy about it. We get a lot of explanation on how Palpatine returned. We learn that he's a clone. We learn how he got his essence into the clone body. We learn that he did indeed die on the Death Star. We get more insight into that scene on the second Death Star. We see how he's been pulling the strings through Snoke and how he's been building up this fleet and things like that. It would have been great to know in the movie, because we're just sitting there wondering how on earth did all this happen. There's some big chosen one implications for Anakin, or Anakin's failure, I guess, to kill Palpatine if it was indeed Palpatine. The fact that it was a clone, I guess, makes it a little bit better, because Vader Anakin did actually kill Palpatine on the Death Star. But again, some continuity issues there make it a little bit hard to stomach. But knowing that he's a clone, knowing that there's a little bit of explanation behind all this, and maybe some lore on Force essence transfer with the Sith and this, that, and the other, we get a Plagueis name drop at one point. It does make it make a little more sense. And I think maybe adding 10 to 15 minutes in this movie just dedicated to Palpatine returning would have went a long way in how we view this film looking back at it now. We also get to see why Lando Calrissian hops back in the fight. In the movie, he's there, he sends them on their way on Pisana, and then we just kind of see him later at the Resistance base. But here we actually get Lando's perspective watching the Millennium Falcon get impounded by the First Order, and that kind of spurs him along to get back in the fight. Would have been very quick, like 10-15 seconds to throw that in the movie, and then would have been like, oh, that's how Lando got back. We get the Chewbacca and Kylo Ren interrogation scene on the First Order starfighter. A lot of people probably already know about that just through concept art and things of that nature, but that's a good scene. It does a lot of the history for Kylo Ren and Chewie. We see that Kylo Ren, even though he's big and bad and he's trying to act that way, he's still very torn on his past, and seeing that connection with Chewbacca, which really we don't explore on screen. We get the Han Solo, we get the Princess Leia, but we don't get Chewie, and he was an important part of Ben Solo's story as well growing up. So it's cool that they got to kind of go in Chewbacca's mind, go in Ben Solo's mind a little bit, Kylo Ren's, and see the history that the two had together. As far as continuity goes and things just making sense, we see Rey taking parts from the TIE fighter that she took to Ahch-To and using that to fix the X-Wing that Force Ghost Luke pulls out of the water. It just makes things make more sense when she takes pieces from one ship, puts it in the other to make it work. It's logical. Now this next part's one of the more interesting things for me. There's a lot of conjecture behind it, but when Rey is hearing these Force Ghost voices at the end of the movie on Exegol, it talks about when she's looking up in the sky and she goes to a place between places. Now, Star Wars fans, what does that sound like? It sounds like a world between worlds. Is it specifically what they are referencing? Honestly, I'm not sure that most of the people doing this movie knew what the world between worlds even is. Maybe they did. Maybe the author of the book knew when she's writing this place between places. But it's pretty cool that we see Rey kind of looking into this other realm. And most Star Wars fans are pretty big fans of the world between worlds as well. So I like to think that maybe she's gazing off into that before she goes and wins this battle. It's a pretty neat thing. We also get some information on the voices that she's hearing, and one phrase in particular kind of stuck out to me, especially after watching Ahsoka, but it's saying that some of the voices were of the past were gone, but others were still anchored to the living or anchored to life or something along those lines. And to me, that makes me think maybe some of these voices were still alive and talking to her through the world between worlds. That leads me to think maybe, just maybe, Ahsoka Leia is not dead. It does kind of leave maybe some openness to some of the stories of the people speaking to Rey, and really Ahsoka is the only one in question of whether she is living or dead at the time. So I thought that was an interesting piece of information. Do with it what you will. And then lastly, as far as the big differences that I noted, was that after Ben Solo dies, we do get some nice closure with him dying at the end and that he has peace in what he's doing, and we get his thought process. That's pretty cool. But then once Rey figures out he's dead, she's kind of sad, but we hear his voice speaking to her saying, "I will always be with you," or something like that. So Reylo people, y'all are probably really big into it. Just as far as the story goes though, I think it's cool that we do hear something from him, because his only words in the film are "ow." Let that sink in a minute. But had we had something maybe through the Force where he gets to deliver some lines to Rey as Ben Solo, I don't think anyone would be complaining about that being in the film. And again, it takes like 3 seconds to do that. It's not that much. So overall, my verdict on the novel, I think it's pretty good. I would give it a 7 out of 10. It still has some of these story issues that the movie has because the story has not changed drastically, but it adds more to the story, so it makes it a lot better. If I'm rating the movie, I probably give it like a 4 or 5 out of 10. So this novel brings it up a few notches. That's a good thing. I think if the movie maybe even had an extra half hour, that would be pushing it right up at 3 hours. I know that's a lot, but if it had a half hour to add in a lot of aspects that the novel has in it, the movie would be so much better. I think people would have enjoyed it a lot more. There wouldn't have been so much confusion about what was going on. But again, novels, books, a lot of times they do get more liberty and more time, so I understand that. If you've read this, let me know what you think about it. If any of this was new to you, let me know what you think about all these parts that maybe you hadn't heard about. Drop that in the comments. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and catch one of these 2 videos next.